Albuquerque.
In July 1952, with Navy orders to the University of New Mexico, I returned to the U.S. with my parents. Shall we pick up the story there, Mike?
Sure, Captain. The recorder is running.
Our flight to New York from Frankfurt, aboard a Flying Tigers chartered C-54, was memorable. We were routed via Ireland, but diverted to the Azores because of weather. The airplane was packed with soldiers and dependents. The lone stewardess had more than she could handle, with kids crying and running up and down the aisles. We were well out over the Atlantic when a fat tech sergeant who insisted on smoking cigars called out loud enough for everyone on the plane to hear, "Stewardess, stewardess, come here. Look out on the right wing. There's oil all over it coming from number 4 engine." Naturally, it became deadly quiet in the cabin as the stewardess looked out to confirm. Still loud enough for everyone to hear, the fat sergeant demanded, "Why didn't they fix that before we took off?" That was the last straw for the overworked and harassed stewardess. She stood up with her hands on her hips and snapped back, "Sergeant, if they kept this plane on the ground for everything that's wrong with it, we never would get in the air." And she stormed up the aisle to the cockpit. When she returned to the cabin, she sat on the arm of a front chair and put her head on her arm on the top of the headrest until we landed at Santa Maria, Azores. All remained still in the cabin. After landing, it was announced that we would stay overnight for an engine change. The next morning, the word quickly went around that the Air Force had refused to give the Flying Tigers an engine. So we reboarded and took off for Newfoundland anyhow, with new oil all over the right wing as before. We arrived at Newfoundland at night in a hellacious thunderstorm to refuel and re-oil the leaky engine, and then took off right back into more thunderstorms for the rest of the night into New York City. I had the window seat directly behind Father and could see that he was perspiring nervously. The turbulence kept everyone buckled to their seats. Frequent flashes of lightning made it appear that the propellers were stopped. Oh boy, I thought. Here's my chance to get even for the time in Portland when Father tried to scare me about flying. "Look, Dad, both engines on our side have quit. I wonder if the other ones quit too." Father just froze and didn't say anything, but I could see his collar soaking in sweat. I wasn't the only coward in the family after all. Sweet revenge. Thank you, God.
Weren't you frightened too, Captain?
No, I was fascinated. I finally had the chance to see night thunderstorms from inside, between, and above them. Mother wasn't scared either. She was always fearless. We had Father's number.
See, Captain, there was some compensation in having a father around after all, wasn't there?
I suppose so, if you look at it from the dark side. Anyhow, this trip was to be the last of my time at home. Father had orders to the Army Band in D.C., but didn't want to be in such a high-profile job. Somehow he was successful in getting his orders changed to Fort Carson, Colorado Springs. On the drive west, we diverted to Columbus, Georgia for a few days to put our home up for sale. So of course I called Elaine. She drove right over to pick me up in her shiny new black Buick sedan and handed me the keys. She had matured a lot and looked great. We drove around to visit our old gang. Now charming, graceful, and self-confident, Elaine outshone all those who had considered her dumb and awkward. Her parents had set her up in business with her own maternity boutique across the Chattahoochee River in Phoenix City, Alabama, and she was obviously doing very well. We also stopped at the Baker Village shop to say hello to her mother, who made it clear that she was not happy to see me back in town. That mattered little to Elaine. She was very glad to see me. I sensed that we could easily pick up where we left off. However, I felt compelled to tell her about Aurelie, and there was no kissing or touching. She said that she had been engaged too, but ended wedding plans when she found she couldn't go through with it. Nevertheless, to my astonishment, Elaine announced that she would move to Albuquerque too. At this point, Mike, I should have taken more interest in the distinction between Elaine and Aurelie. Though it meant a 4-year separation, and despite my protests, Aurelie chose to be an English major at the University of Vermont. Elaine, on the other hand, after a 3.5-year separation, with no expectation of ever seeing me again, plus knowing I was engaged now, was ready to leave her home and business to move to Albuquerque to be with me.
What happened, Captain?
Nothing. I never wrote to Elaine or heard of her again. Out of loyalty to Aurelie, I told myself.
Ever regret it, Captain?
Not really, Mike. Though I certainly retained fond feelings for Elaine and thought of her many times over the years. I believe that my nostalgia had more to do with lost innocence than love. After all, we grew up together through adolescence in a very successfully intimate way that I could never recapture with others. In retrospect, I see that Elaine was smarter than me in recognizing that was love. Perhaps I was blind to my own feelings. But that's the way it is with boys, isn't it?
Yes, Captain. Some would call it immaturity, but women say that all men are out of touch with their feelings.
Yes, Mike, I like the way a recently divorced actress once put it. Sure, women can fake orgasms, but men can fake whole relationships.
Next stop, Albuquerque, Captain?
Yes, Mike, as we drove west through Texas and into New Mexico, I had a growing sinking feeling. As we descended from the Sandia Mountains on Route 66 east of Albuquerque, it looked like we had landed on the moon. It was a clear, dry day with unlimited visibility to the horizon 100 miles west, without a tree or hill or any sign of life, just desert sand and sagebrush. Yet the road sign said Albuquerque was only 15 miles away. We knew that Route 66 ran straight through the middle of it, and we could see the road on the western horizon. But there was no city. As we approached, we began seeing a few run-down gas stations, motels, gift shops advertising Indian turquoise jewelry, and a rattlesnake zoo. Nothing was said. We were totally speechless until Mother finally began laughing. Father and I joined in, but it was one of those laughing spells which comes from believing that nothing could be this bad. Finally, we saw that the reason we hadn't seen Albuquerque was that it was hidden in the valley of the mile-wide and a foot-deep Rio Grande River. As we drove into town, it was more of the same type of businesses we had seen approaching, just more of them. It was apparent the entire city was stretched out along Route 66 and was literally little more than a wide place in the road. The last straw was driving onto the university campus. Instead of an ivy-covered community of scholars, the damn place looked like what I imagined a Navajo reservation would be. All the buildings were mud huts. Yeah, I know, Mike, adobe. How quaint. A big lump formed in my throat. Mother cried. She told me later that she cried all the way to Colorado Springs to have left me in such a dismal place. As excited as I was to be moving forward, I remembered how beautiful Bavaria was and what a great time that had been in my life. I missed Germany. Sorry, Mike. I know that it's your hometown I'm running down, and I know how it has changed into a much wider place in the road since the 50s. But it's still no place I would choose to live.
I don't get it, Captain. Everything was going your way just as you always hoped. You were far away from home on a full scholarship, sailing smoothly on toward a degree, a Navy commission, and flight training. You had it all in the palm of your hand. What was missing?
Quite right, Mike. I had no legitimate reason to complain. I simply felt depressingly lost and out of place. Germany had been so good, nothing could follow it. There, I was with a close group of classmates I loved, and I was socially successful. I had lettered in sports, elected president of the student council, and declared the Duke of Harlaching. I had been raised above the self I had been before by wonderful people in a grand environment. In Munich, I was a big fish in a perfect little pond. For certain, there was no hope for that in Albuquerque, where I was doomed to remain a small fry in a very unattractive big desert.
How did you cope with it then?
I worked, not at academics where I did poorly, barely keeping my head above water, but at a series of part-time jobs.
Why did you work? Didn't the scholarship include tuition, books, and fees, plus $50 a month?
Yes, Mike, but it wasn't enough. My parents had to send $80 a month to cover my room and board. I was not happy to still be dependent on them.
What jobs did you have?
The first semester I lived in the dormitory, a zoo with no chance to study amidst the calamity. The only good thing was that my roommate, Ernie Suazo, introduced me to Spanish culture and, against his will, to your mother.
Against his will?
Ernie and I were at the campus bookstore when my breath was blown away by one of the most beautiful women I had ever seen. She was in tight jeans and a turquoise sweater, silver belt, long black hair, and flashing dark eyes. Ernie knew her and spoke to her, but he didn't introduce me. Later, I asked Ernie to arrange an introduction, but he was reluctant. "You don't want to know her, Manny. She is bad news." He refused to elaborate, but I persisted until Ernie finally included me in a family home social event with Emma Rodriguez attending. We dated on and off for the next 3 years, but she allowed little more intimacy than kissing, even though we sometimes spent the night at her apartment. My old karma in relationships remained unchanged. Just as well, I thought. I was being loyal to Aurelie and avoiding risks which could upset the future. As an NROTC midshipman, I was subject to the same regulations as the Naval Academy midshipman. Marriage or pregnancy was a Class A offense with mandatory expulsion.
Ah, I see where this is leading, Captain. But what was Ernie warning you against?
He never said more than that Emma had once run away to be married. Her parents had them arrested on their wedding night and had the marriage annulled, so I assumed she was underage. I never raised the subject further with Emma, and she didn't offer the story, but she did admit to a prior marriage in the paperwork for ours. Perhaps you can elaborate?
This is news to me, Captain. I know nothing about it, but it says something about your relationship that you didn't discuss it, doesn't it?
What it says is that we were not very close.
Then why did you go on seeing each other for 3 years?
Good question, Mike. I can't speak for Emma. She was mysteriously exotic. I understood she was artistically gifted as a dancer and singer on stage, but I only saw impromptu dances at her apartment. She said she was a part-time UNM student, but I didn't see evidence of that. I do know that she was working for an attorney. I enjoyed being with Emma because she was bright and eccentric. Mostly I enjoyed her company and introduction to Albuquerque's Spanish culture. Castilian Spanish, she said, I suppose to distinguish herself from being Mexican or Indian. Not that it mattered to me. The warm social gatherings of families and friends were uniquely special to me. Toddlers to grandparents contributed to the entertainment with songs, dances, or poetry. It was a great getaway from superficial campus fraternity life into the kind of genuine warmth I had felt in the Azores. I was surprised to discover, however, that there were strong prejudices on both sides between Hispanics and Anglos in Albuquerque. I had never thought of myself as Hispanic, nor experienced any kind of bias. I discovered that I was passing as either Hispanic or Anglo without being either one.
Weren't you a fraternity member, Captain?
Yes, Ernie and I went through fraternity rush, just to confirm our negative attitudes against them. But to my surprise, the Kappa Sigmas were different. Many of the members were Korean War veterans and football players. The atmosphere was genuinely informal and friendly, without the phony social attitudes of the other houses. In any event, they were better than the chaos at the dorm, so I applied. I thought Ernie had also, but that didn't happen, so I rarely saw him again. Much later, I learned he had been blackballed because he was Hispanic, and that I would have been as well, except that someone checked with the registrar to find out where I was from. I was okay. I was from Germany.
How did you feel about that, Captain?
I have little respect for fraternities. I learned that in those days, most fraternities and sororities, including Kappa Sigma, also had membership restrictions against blacks and Jews written into their constitutions. I believe the restriction against Hispanics was an informal Southwest add-on. In the early 50s, Congress passed a law against racial or religious membership restrictions in private organizations or public facilities. If you saw or read Gentleman's Agreement, you recall that many Eastern resort hotels excluded Jews. The Masons would not admit Catholics. Within a year, any university with such affiliated organizations on campus would cease to receive federal funding. Any fraternity or sorority with those restrictions were to be disallowed. I attended the Kappa Sigma National Conclave that year, where of course constitutional changes were the major topic. I have to say that I was highly impressed by the impassioned eloquence of the opposing speeches by the representatives from Southern schools. The gist of their presentations was to mourn the demise of tradition, as well as those chapters on Southern campus. For if the restrictions were deleted, then no Southern family would allow their children to join a club which had permitted blacks or Jews, even if only in Northern chapters. I don't know how it turned out in Southern chapters, but of course the constitutional restrictions were removed in all Greek organizations. Even so, there were no blacks, Jews, or Hispanics in our chapter.
Did you go along with that, Captain?
As a matter of fact, no. When I left the chapter, it was headed for its financial demise and is no longer on the UNM campus. I never heard or asked what happened. Next time I visited, 1969, it was a vacant lot.
What are your feelings about that now?
Nothing one way or the other, Mike. UNM had the reputation of being a playboy school. Many students were East Coast kids, apparently judged unworthy by their parents of an Ivy League education, and were banished to the West. Many of the others were veterans going to college on the GI Bill purely for the free ride and social life with no intention of graduating. The demise of Kappa Sigma was no loss to UNM.
Were there no bright spots in fraternity life?
Actually, yes, Mike, it's good you asked. I don't mean to be totally negative. Our initiation was a memorable hoot indeed. It began with us pledges, locked up in one of two upstairs attics, the one called Hell, the other one was called Heaven. There was a huge fire in the front room fireplace with red-hot Greek KS branding irons. We figured they were going to fake branding us and weren't worried about it until they led the first pledge out of hell blindfolded. And we soon heard the very real, horrifyingly painful scream of our new brother. There was no doubt about the genuineness of the scream or its source. It became very quiet in hell as one by one the event was reenacted with each of us. Then it was my turn. I was led blindfolded and forced to kneel head down, facing the raging inferno with my bare butt in the air. Several brothers on both sides firmly held me in place as ceremonial incantations were recited. The red-hot branding iron was passed close enough to my face that I could feel the searing heat of it. I was told to brace as the branding iron was rammed directly to the right cheek of my bare ass, and boy did I scream in pain as I heard the searing sound and smell of burned flesh. But wait, I definitely felt the heat of the red-hot iron on my butt, but there was no pain. At last the blindfold was removed and the truth revealed. The iron applied to our rears was cold-soaked in dry ice. The freezing temperature had the same effect on the mind as heat. As the cold iron was applied, the red-hot iron was pressed against a piece of meat nearby to complete the audio and odor effects, which were stunning to say the least.
Very clever. What other fun and games were there?
There were several ingenious winner-gets-a-prize competitions. One had us in two lines sitting on the floor facing each other with a paper napkin between our feet. At the sound of go, we pulled as much hair off the legs of the pledge opposite us as we could and placed it on the napkin before us. The pledge with the most hair on his napkin at stop won. My favorite, though, was the relay race. We divided into two teams at opposite ends of the room, nude. At the sound of go, a contestant on each team picked up a raw egg off the floor with his butt, carried it to the opposite end of the room, and placed it on the floor for his teammate to pick up for return, and so forth. If a contestant broke an egg or dropped one, he had to go back for another one. The winning team got a prize. If you have never tried to pick up an egg with your butt and walk 20 feet with it in place without breaking or dropping it, you simply have never lived, Mike.
Good grief. What did the sorority sisters do for initiation fun?
I have no idea, but it does spark one's imagination to consider their relay races, doesn't it? I never got close enough to a sister to ask, but I'm sure they weren't as inventive as we were. In fact, I'm breaking an oath of secrecy and telling you what we did. However, the Kappa Sigs are no longer at UNM, so I might get away with this revelation 75 years after the fact.
I should think so, Captain, but even if they track you down, what could they do about it?
Who knows? They might really brand me this time.
What were fraternity social functions like?
Equally inventive. We had BYOB, pan parties, at the Rio Grande. The pan was a galvanized wash tub with blocks of ice into which whatever booze you brought, whiskey, rum, gin, brandy, beer, etc., was dumped into the mix for consumption by dipping fruit jars into the highly potent concoction. We also had a poverty party where the house was boarded up and the electricity turned off. Entrance was down a coal chute into the dark and spooky cellar. Lit candles stuck in the tops of liquor bottles provided the only lighting. Campus regulations prohibited serving alcohol, so the liquor bottles were filled with booze. All you had to do for a drink was pull out the candle.
Sounds like fun. What jobs did you have?
Well, let's see. First, I was a houseboy at the Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority house, where the sisters did their best to embarrass me. Then I drove a home delivery van for Smokey Joe's restaurant, the best food deal in town, where the cook was said to blow his nose in whatever he was cooking if something upset him. A waitress there told me that if she had problem customers, she spit in their coffee. Then I arranged and delivered flowers for McCown's Flowers. Weddings, Easter, Mother's Day, etc. were major rat races. One day I was delivering 72 orchid corsages to a convention downtown when I saw an 18-wheeler with an explosive sign on its bumper in my rearview mirror, bearing down on me at a stoplight. The driver was looking in his rearview mirror and never even touched his brakes before rear-ending me, pushing me into the car ahead. When I called Kevin, the shop owner, he cried, "How are the flowers?" Finally, I became our fraternity treasurer, houseboy, and house manager, which paid all my living expenses and released me from being dependent on my parents. Our cook was a large and wonderful black lady with a badly disfigured face who said she had been Frank Sinatra's cook during his first marriage. She thought they had been a wonderfully happy couple and was very saddened by their divorce. We became good friends, and she insisted that I visit her at her home. When I arrived, the whole family was there, including an attractive young black lady my age. It was a setup. Apparently, my passing abilities knew no limits. Nevertheless, I did pass up this opportunity.
I'm surprised, Captain. From what I know, you rarely passed up such opportunities. So what was your academic experience like at UNM?
Bad start. I had enhanced my Navy scholarship application by saying I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. UNM didn't have an aero major, though, so I signed up for mechanical engineering. As a consequence, none of the 64 credit hours I had earned in my 2 years at Maryland were applicable, so I was a freshman again. To add insult to injury, I did so poorly on the UNM math aptitude test that I had to take a no-credit dumbbell math course. One day in the mechanical drawing class, the Polish professor looked at my work, then up at me and said, "You don't really want to be an engineer, do you?" So I went to the counselors and took all their vocational interest tests, which indicated a strong interest in music. But Navy would not permit majoring in theology or music. Next on the list was psychology. The counselor advised that a BA in psych was worthless unless my parents could support me for life. Well, I thought, my parents couldn't support me, but the Navy could.
So you switched majors then?
No, I struggled through the rest of the second semester. The last straw came during registration for my third semester. I had an unresolvable schedule conflict, which would have put me in another math course with a professor I could not bear. So I went to the chairman of the psychology department for approval to switch majors and began the tedious registration process all over, complicated by having to sort out my engineering credits as well as past credits at Maryland. I was overjoyed to discover that all of my credits from Maryland, plus the year of engineering, had fulfilled all the course requirements for a BA in psychology, except total number of credit hours. I had just gone from being a freshman to a senior. I had 2 years of scholarship remaining to do 1 year of academics, a sleigh ride if ever there was one. Thereafter, every psych course I took was in graduate school, many with labs. One experiment I recall was testing nipple sensitivity to temperature changes. With 3 years of Navy scholarship remaining, I could even coast through to a master's degree.
But why psychology instead of another major, Captain?
Why not? Psychology was relatively easy and interesting, and liked better, so why not do it on Navy time? Moreover, I enjoyed writing stream of conscious thought short stories and had an underlying ambition to one day write the great American novel. I believed that an understanding of human behavior would be more useful than a degree in English literature. Coincidentally, I found it useful background as a leader and manager in the Navy, as well as in personal relations. There are greater benefits to higher education than job training, aren't there?
Yes, indeed. Life enrichment and disciplined thinking among them. Speaking of the Navy, what was the NROTC program like?
Academically, we took a professional development course each semester, such as naval orientation, naval history, and navigation. Once a week, we formed up in uniform at the stadium for drill. For a good laugh, Mike, never pass up the opportunity to see a Navy unit trying to march. You'd think we were all on rolling decks at sea with no one marking time. Each summer, we went on 6-week Navy cruises. Beyond that, the NROTC unit was much like a fraternity, only better, I thought. I was active in intramural sports competition. I ran in track events and won the Southwestern Conference intramural foil and épée fencing championships. I was also team captain of our pistol team and ranked #1 in aptitude evaluation in my first year. My best friends at UNM were fellow midshipmen, Dave Sanchez and Max Sloan, who were on the pistol team too. We have access to the Colt Woodsman 22 caliber target pistols, which we used to hunt jackrabbits on the Navajo reservation until we got bored with that and shot at each other from behind boulders just to hear the bullets ricochet over our heads, a la the Western movies. Dave Sanchez, who admitted he was the bastard son of a Tijuana prostitute, did a tour in the Marine Corps before getting his PhD in math from Cambridge and returning to the UNM faculty for a career as a math professor. Max Sloan quit smoking because his younger sister died of lung cancer in high school. He had a fatal crash one night flying a T-28 in flight training. The cause was carbon monoxide poisoning. Jim Weber, who I once heard from every Christmas, did a tour as communications officer aboard an aircraft carrier, and then went on to a PhD and college teaching career, retiring as president of a Colorado college.
If I have the dates right, Captain, you graduated in June 1955, 5 months before I was born. So you were at UNM only 3 years instead of 4. Why didn't you use all of the Navy scholarship?
You have the dates right, Mike. No, I did not use the 4th year of the scholarship. Nor did I go for the master's degree, even though it would have been a relatively simple matter. My favorite professor, Dr. Keston, who taught all the child psych courses, was an exceptionally colorful, eccentric, and brilliant man. He had been a professional student at the University of Chicago during the Depression and had 3 PhDs, psychology, chemistry, and music, and considered himself to be a concert-quality pianist. He had given a battery of personality tests to UNM students and learned the music majors deviated the most from normal, followed by psych and sociology majors. He then designed a music appreciation test in cooperation with his friend Dmitri Mitropoulos, conductor of the Chicago Symphony. Each question on the test was an audio, multiple choice on tape. Each question was 4 short selections of classical music, which were to be ranked in order from best to worst. For example, one of the questions consisted of 4 selections from Beethoven's 6th Symphony. He had given the test to thousands of people of all ages and backgrounds. Those who scored highest on his music test were then given the personality tests. His purpose was to learn more about the musical personality, but he hadn't yet analyzed his data. So far, the only observation he made was that you could as well give a monkey his music test as a pre-adolescent child. I had taken many of his classes and scored well on his test. In my third year at UNM, I had fulfilled the course requirements for a master's degree and had another year of scholarship remaining with nothing to do but analyze Dr. Keston's data for my thesis.
Why did you decide against it, Captain?
There were several reasons. First, I would have had to take statistics courses in preparation for grinding out the numbers, hard and boring. Besides, a master's in psychology wasn't worth much more than a bachelor degree, and I had no career ambition to be a psychologist. Second, I wasn't getting any younger, and I wanted to get on with flying. Third, Aurelie was graduating. Most of all, I just wanted to get the hell out of town. I was simply sick of school and Albuquerque.
Was I a factor in that last reason, Captain?
No, Mike, my mind was made up the year before, when I told Navy my intention to double up on naval science courses so I could be commissioned after my third summer cruise. There was a long spell that last year when I hardly ever saw Emma.
Didn't you see Aurelie at all during those 3 years?
Very little, Mike. It's a long drive from New Mexico to Vermont. So the only brief opportunities were before or after 6-week Navy summer training cruises at her homes in New Jersey, then Vermont. Aurelie's mother, Helen, and stepfather, Clayton, kept me occupied with helping them with their hobby, restoring and remodeling classic New England homes for resale. One year, I drove Bob's and my 41 Plymouth East. I was stopped by a cop in a small town who was very suspicious of a reprobate-looking kid wearing a well-weathered cowboy hat and an old corduroy barn coat full of holes, driving an old black-primered sedan with New Mexico plates in Vermont headed for the Canadian border. All my luggage and the car seats were spread all over the road for search, and lots of radio cop talk taking place. Finally, the bastard just drove off and left me to reload my stuff.
Your cop karma wasn't working very well in those days, was it?
Those infrequent visits with Aurelie don't sound like much to maintain an engagement on. We sustained the relationship on the strong bond we developed in the 3 years in Germany. In addition to the romance, we were truly good friends. In a way, Aurelie was like family to me. Besides, we both put college ahead of our marriage plans.
Didn't Aurelie visit you in Albuquerque?
No, Mike. Presumably money was the obstacle. Still, it was a sore subject. I couldn't get over feeling that if she were truly serious about us, Aurelie would have come to UNM with me in the first place. After all, she was not going to be a rocket scientist or on a scholarship. She was an English major with the only stated ambition of having 4 kids. I guess I hung on because I made a commitment and hadn't come up with a better option. The truth was that marriage was not top priority for me either. It was easier to go along with a comfortable status quo for the time being. Nevertheless, a 6-year courtship and engagement was way too long. Prolonged absences do not make the heart grow fonder, as we later discovered.
Didn't you see your parents at all while you were at UNM?
Oh, sure. I drove to Colorado Springs for holidays, but Mother was working at the Post Exchange, and they lived in a small 2-room apartment, so I didn't see much of them and slept on the living room couch. 2 of the trips were memorable, however. One of my frat brothers, Bill Thompson, was from Pueblo, 40 miles south of Colorado Springs. So I sometimes drove with him. There were 4 of us in a beat-up Ford going home for Christmas '53 when one of the water pumps sprang a leak. The garages were already closed for the weekend, but we were able to get the owner of an auto parts store to sell us a pump, which we had to change ourselves. The 2 water pumps on flathead Ford V8s were also engine mounts, so there was lots of grunting and cursing required to change one. In the process, we lost all the antifreeze, and the temperature was forecast to go well below 0 on our route through Raton Pass. But we figured we would be okay as long as we kept the engine running. In the long climb up the pass, however, the engine got very hot. We assumed that the new pump was leaking, so lacking other available fluids, we all peed into the radiator, to no avail. What we failed to realize was that the water in the radiator had frozen, which stopped circulation to the engine, so it was steaming hot. The engine finally quit altogether, and we were stuck near the summit of Raton Pass at 1 a.m. with no traffic and temperatures which froze local thermometers at 40 below 0. Our only hope was to bundle up as much as possible inside the car and hope for the best. Fortunately, several hours later, a Good Samaritan stopped and gave us all a ride to Pueblo. Another trip was even more eventful. My roommate, Bob Bogan, had a 1932 Model B Roadster hot rod, which his girlfriend refused to ride in. So Bob and I bought a 1940 Plymouth 2-door sedan, and I got to drive the Roadster a lot, including one spring break trip home alone. It was 1 a.m. on the road between Pueblo with no traffic when I saw the headlights of a car pull onto the highway behind me and close the distance very rapidly to dangerously close behind me and just stayed there. My speedometer wasn't working, so I was guessing speed with the tachometer. I could probably have outrun the bastard, but something told me to just hold the 3,300 revolutions per minute I had been cruising at. Finally, the car shot past me, and I saw that it was a state trooper. Not long afterward, I saw the headlights pull out again, and the event repeated 3 times before the cop gave up on me. I got home about 2 a.m. When I got up, the news was all about a state trooper who was shot 3 times and killed at about 1:30 a.m. on the Pueblo-Colorado Springs highway. There was only one witness who said he saw the cop on the side of the road behind an old convertible with a young male in a leather jacket in the cop's passenger seat and the interior lights on. I fit the description. Later, since my parents weren't home, I decided to go for a ride on the same route north toward Denver. A short way out of town, however, I saw a police roadblock ahead. There I was in a leather jacket, driving an old convertible, and had been on the road from Pueblo when the cop was shot. So I stupidly whipped a U-turn across the median and sped off south. Fortunately, I got away with it. Otherwise, God knows my picture would have been on the front page of every newspaper, and the evening TV news would have had film of me in handcuffs being led away to jail, and who knows what after that. They never did catch the killer, so I would have been the only suspect.
How fortunate for you, Captain. Someone was surely watching over you that time.
That time and many others, Mike.
You have mentioned the Navy summer cruises. What were those like?
My 1953 summer cruise was aboard Shannon, a destroyer converted to a mine layer, home-ported in Norfolk, Virginia. There were over 100 of us mids aboard. Half were fourth class, the others first class, that is, freshmen and seniors. Also, half of us were NROTC, the rest were Naval Academy. The Naval Academy mids were tightly bonded and naturally looked down their noses at us amateur sailors. They knew how to spit-shine shoes. We all displaced the lower-rank sailors, so of course we lived and worked like them, bunked 2 feet apart in hot, cramped compartments. Standing 2 separate 4-hour watches a day as helmsmen, bridge lookouts, boiler and engine rooms, etc., we were otherwise occupied with scrubbing, mopping, and chipping paint, or conducting drills. There was precious little spare time and no place to hide. The officers, including the captain, were aloof and kept their distance from us and the hostile crew. Much of the crew appeared to be waterfront rats who enjoyed taunting us. For example, several petty officers in the engine room had fun grossing us out by displaying their advanced cases of venereal diseases and dwelling on the morbid details of their disgusting sex lives. It was not a happy ship by any means. We were bound for Brazil and Trinidad in company with the carrier Saipan, cruiser Macon, and several other destroyers. Getting there, of course, meant crossing the equator and all the traditional fun and games accompanying initiation of polywogs in ceremonies conducted by the shellbacks. For this cruise, that meant we could expect some serious physical abuse by the crew, who were all shellbacks, reveling in the opportunity to dish it out to us lower than the lowest layer of whale shit on the ocean floor, future officers. In preparation, the shellbacks rigged a framework on the gun deck to support a canvas-lined pool with a high platform attached, as well as other ominous-looking torture devices. We polywogs decided that the best defense was an offense, and 3 days before crossing, we revolted. Some enterprising polywog poured acid in the pool, which burned large holes in the canvas. Then we stormed the gun deck to tear down the structures, which resulted in some hand-to-hand engagements, ending when 3-inch fire hoses were turned on us. One mid broke an arm when he was blasted off the gun deck to the main deck. Similar revolts were taking place on the other ships, and one polywog was lost overboard. This was serious stuff, Mike, and it got worse. The shellbacks finally put down our rebellion the day before crossing. All us polywogs were corralled into the mess hall, with the lights and ventilation turned off, wearing just our underwear. The next day, the ceremonies began by taking us out of the mess hall, one at a time, blindfolded, crawling on hands and knees on the steel decks, with shocks administered by a bare electrical wire to ensure submissiveness, before being forced to crawl through several 2x6 bottomless canvas laundry bags sewn together to make a tunnel lined with fuel oil and garbage. To speed us on our way, shellbacks beat us with 4-foot lengths of flat 3-inch fire hose, shillelaghs soaked in seawater with nicely cord-bound handles. From the tunnel, each polywog was led to the royal court, commanded by King Neptune himself and his queen, to face charges of grave misconduct and sentencing of punishment. Also present at court was Davy Jones and the royal baby, who was the fattest, hairiest, ugliest, and grossest boiler room sailor aboard, dressed only in a diaper. Homage to the court was paid by each pollywog by kissing the royal baby's fat, hairy, greasy, bare belly several times with a helping shove to the back of the head. Amazingly, all our revolt damage had been repaired, so the next station was in the stool at the top of the 10-foot tower above the pool filled with fuel oil and garbage. Each pollywog was pushed backward off the stool into the pool and then led to the royal dentist chair, where the royal medicine was administered down the pollywog's throat with a grease gun. The royal medicine was a masterful concoction designed to cause projectile vomiting. Polywogs were then led to another chair to be administered the royal antidote by the same means and with similar violent results. After more tunnel crawling and other stations I can't recall, the last obstacle was running the gauntlet down the line of shellbacks, swinging fire hose shillelaghs, before being washed down with fire hoses to clear away the oil, garbage, blood, and tattered remains of underwear.
Good God, Captain. Does the Navy still permit that?
Well, they still were in 1971 aboard the carrier America when we sailed from Cuba via Brazil, Cape Horn, and Australia to Vietnam, and then across the equator again, going the rest of the way around the world, coming home. Thank God I had already done it. With the vast expanse of flight deck and more than 6,000 sailors aboard, imagine what running the gauntlet was like for the polywogs on that cruise.
How do you prove that you are a shellback, not a polywog? Do they just take your word for it?
Lord, no. An official entry of the crossing is made in each shellback's Navy service record. Plus, he is presented an 8x10 certificate from the domain of Neptunus Rex for framing, as well as a wallet-sized replica. Anyone who could not provide absolute shellback proof was assumed to be a polywog and made to go through the initiation again. I carried my shellback card in my wallet for 30 years.
For good reason. That's the most brutal ceremonial naval tradition I have ever heard of. What do they do aboard cruise ships?
It varies, but I believe the ceremony is little more than a cute costume party in the ballroom.
How do the merchant ships conduct the ceremony?
I don't know, Mike. There aren't many crew members aboard merchant ships, and most have crossed many times. Still, given their usual multinational mix of waterfront rats, I imagine that some polywogs get worked over in some grisly ways best not contemplated. At any rate, only Navy shellback records will get you out of doing it the Navy way.
What was Brazil like in 1953?
A mixed bag. We were the first U.S. Navy ships to visit in 11 years, and we were told we might not be welcome because of communist leanings and anti-U.S. sentiments. Half the task group went to the capital, Rio de Janeiro, with the carrier Saipan, and we went to Sao Paulo, Brazil's largest city. I'm glad to say that the natives were friendly. I met a tall, gracious, and lovely young lady at a command performance embassy reception who was coincidentally named Maria Rodriguez. She spoke not a word of English, nor I Portuguese. We dated very properly all 10 days in port, and I even met her parents. But the only advanced conversations we had were when we encountered my pal Dave Sanchez, who did his best translating for us with his Spanish. After touring Maria aboard Shannon, one of the chief petty officers told me that she was the most beautiful Brazilian girl he had seen, a very high compliment considering the competition. In Dave's translation of our final conversation, Maria declared her intention to visit me in Albuquerque. I didn't take it lightly since her family approved and appeared to have the means to send her.
What came of that, Captain?
We exchanged English-Portuguese letters with Dave's translations for several months. But when she confirmed her intention to visit with proposed dates, I backed off. It was going to be way too complicated, expensive, and time-consuming for me to host her properly. Plus, for her and her parents, it would probably mean we were engaged if we weren't already. So I put off responding with polite regrets and never heard from her again.
I guess that episode was similar in some ways to being presented with the young lady during your Azores visit.
Exactly. Good training. While Portuguese romancing may advance slowly, it seemed that wedding plans proceeded at light speed. Scary business, Mike. As I was to learn the hard way, the Spanish culture can be similar.
So how did the old world Portuguese match with the Brazilians?
From my perspective now, having visited Brazil 3 times, compared with 4 visits to the Azores and a year living in Portugal, and despite the fact that most of the Brazilian Portuguese descended from the Azores, my impression is that there is little similarity between Brazilians and other Portuguese. The traditional cultural and religious constraints imposed in the Old World vanished and went to the opposite extreme in Brazil. Rio's Ipanema Beach and Carnival are about as free and far removed from Old World Catholicism and the traditionally happy to be sad Portuguese image as it is possible to get.
Are you saying that the Brazilians tend to be less moral by comparison?
Not really, just freer from artificial constraints. Underneath, I think most people want to have morally decent lives. The beaches and carnivals can give an exaggerated impression, whereas daily lives are conventional. For example, the first night ashore, Dave and I went to a bar where there were several single girls who appeared to be prostitutes. One of our shipmate midshipmen was sitting with one until the girl erupted emotionally and drove the midshipman away from her table. He came over to sit with us, confirming that she was a prostitute, and confessed that he had insulted her. We could see that she was shedding tears. Finally, the mid, feeling very remorseful, returned to her table and apologized profusely. When we sailed out of Sao Paulo, I saw her on the dock crying and waving her handkerchief to that midshipman. What he and I learned, and I saw in all countries outside the U.S., is that prostitution is a socially accepted profession, sometimes even honored as geishas are, and that those women, like all others, deserve to be treated with respect, whether or not you use or approve of their services. I'm reminded of a great line in an old movie you may recall. The story was about a socialite who is attracted to a professional assassin who only sleeps with prostitutes. So she poses as one to get him to bed. The next day at lunch, she asks her older and wiser girlfriend why such a man would only date prostitutes. Her friend replies, "Because he knows what their price is. He doesn't know what our price is."
Are you suggesting that all women set a price for sex, Captain?
To some degree, yes, but that's not as cynical as it may sound. Some Eastern cultures place very low value on women and allow no opportunities outside of marriage except prostitution. In general, Western women are much more practical about taking advantage of supply and demand. Most often in women's marriage decisions, security is the price. After all, raising children requires it. So, women need a reason, but men only need a place. We suffer from a flaw in God's design, which gave us a mind and a penis, but the blood supply to operate only one of them at a time.
Too true, I fear. Pitiful, isn't it? So where to next? Trinidad, wasn't it?
Ah, yes, Trinidad is a beautiful, lush, tropical, mountainous island in the West Indies, off the coast of Venezuela, and at that time was still a British colony. Port of Spain, the capital, was the most colorful contrast to any place I had been. Populated mostly by black descendants of slaves, plus American Indians and East Indians, Trinidad is the home of calypso music, steel drums, and limbo dancing, which were in their prime then. Max, David, and I went ashore mid-morning with bathing suits under our uniforms, intending to go to the beach. On the way, however, we stopped at a cabaret and had a 15-cent rum and Coca-Cola, and another, and then another. The only other customer was the youthful remains of an expatriate American who appeared to have spent the night on the floor, semi-revived for more debauchery. He was dancing with one of the bar girls to the calypso music of a three-piece band. On my third rum and coke before noon, I could easily see myself as the wasted American if I stayed in Trinidad a week. During a break, the guitarist-singer came to our table and sang verses describing each of us to a T. It was dinner time when we left. So much for the beach. After a fine Indian meal, we followed the sounds of a steel band to another cabaret where the bar girl waitresses were taking turns dancing under the limbo pole with a very thin guy who must have been nearly 7 feet tall. More rum and cokes. The mood was magic. Several sailors ventured onto the floor and did the Navy proud with their performance. 3 of the girls came to our table and stood behind us, rubbing our shoulders. The girl behind me explained that though she was heavy, that was a good thing, because the fat made her tighter, and she offered to satisfy me for $5. Then she ran her left hand down my chest to my crotch, where she was visibly shocked to find no trace of manhood, which had been well compressed by my tight bathing suit. As she stood back, she said that if I could satisfy her, she would give me $5. Thus ended my closest encounter with a black girl. Not so for the sailors, though. Even for the deep Southerners, the color barrier quickly dissolved.
Different attitudes and different latitudes, Captain?
Exactly right. Even in the 50s, the differences were socially artificial. They always were, as we have learned more about the lives and loves of folks like Thomas Jefferson.
So, was that the extent of your romantic adventures in Trinidad?
Not quite. The 3 of us returned to the Indian restaurant for lunch on the following day. 3 attractive Indian girls were there, so I invited them to join us, and I introduced us as Tom, Dick, and Harry. Since they were married and just having a girls' day out, it was all quite innocent, until one of the girls said her husband was traveling off the island, so if I came to her house the next day for lunch, she would cook me a real Indian meal. I accepted with every intention of going, but thought better of it after sleeping on it.
Excuse me for saying so, Captain, but you were a 21-year-old cherry boy. Either you were in masterful control, or you were pretty damn shy.
Just shy, I think. One of my exes teased me about being a monk in a previous life. Maybe so. I have always been fascinated by Gregorian chants. Still, I truly loved women and wanted nothing more than a close, loving, and lasting relationship. I just couldn't loosen up for one-night stands with strangers, and I was wary of getting girls I cared about into trouble. Foremost, I meant to observe at least one of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not commit adultery.
It sounds more like you were just scared, Captain.
Have it your way, Mike. You may be right. Whatever the reason, as I said before, I felt that door would lead me to leaving behind important hopes and dreams of the future. I was correct.
Okay, we covered the ports. How was the rest of that cruise?
Awful. Without dwelling on it, it was by far the most negative Navy experience I ever had. The foul nature of the crew was exacerbated by the attitude of the officers. Life at sea aboard Shannon was miserable. Destroyers never stop rolling, even in calm seas. So you have to hang on to something every step or risk injury on slippery decks. There were long lines for awful meals with an extreme shortage of silverware. So you had to take the dirty silver from a man leaving the table or eat with your hands. A deep dislike developed between the equally numbered Naval Academy and NROTC midshipmen. One day, when we were all together in the cramped cruise compartment below decks, we got word that the entire University of Oklahoma sophomore class of 40 midshipmen had been killed in a Navy plane crash. One of the Naval Academy mids was overheard by an Oklahoma mid to make the extremely distasteful observation, "Well, we all move up 40 numbers." There was very nearly a full-blown riot, and it might have been better if we had cleared the air with one, for the bitterness did not diminish. Everything went sour as we were enveloped in hostility toward each other and the Navy. Another mid and I intentionally disgusted the rest of the mids by generating a phony discussion and survey of heterosexual oral sex, an unacceptable topic in those days. One of my jobs was first loader on a 4-gun 40mm mount, which meant feeding 30 pounds of 4-round clips into a cannon firing at a rate of about 2 rounds a second, which caused me to jump a foot every time it fired. Once during gunnery, practice with live ammunition firing 5-inch guns and 40mm anti-aircraft guns at a target sleeve towed by an airplane. We were steaming downwind at the speed of the wind, so gun smoke enveloped the ship and obscured the target from our view. Controlling the radar gun director, a first-class mid called for a ceasefire to wait for the smoke to clear. But in his zeal to commence firing again, he prematurely locked the gun director onto the tow plane, and a number of rounds were fired at it before ceasing. Several rounds exploded near the tail of the tow plane, fortunately without damage or injury.
The captain must have nearly dirtied his pants at the prospect of losing his command as he saw a mid shoot at a tow plane.
No doubt, but he surely would not have been missed by anyone aboard. He was a lousy officer and ship handler. To cap off the cruise, he stopped the ship dead in the water 50 feet from the dock, and we had to haul it in by hand. I wasn't going to be missed either. In part as the result of our sex survey, I was ranked last in aptitude by my peer midshipmen. So in 6 weeks, I went from number 1 in my class to dead bottom. Good for me. Screw the Navy.
Kind of makes me wonder how you made it in the Navy, Captain.
Me too, Mike, and you ain't heard nothing yet. Though that cruise was the low point in my attitude. Father once told me that I was too rebellious to succeed in the military. Fortunately, however, naval aviation was more forgiving of leadership styles than the Army or Air Force was. I damn sure would not have succeeded as a black shoe destroyer sailor.
I can see why you ended up loving the Navy so much then. Your second cruise was better?
Yes, for the second-class cruise, our 6 weeks was split between amphibious warfare orientation in Norfolk, Virginia, and aviation indoctrination at Corpus Christi, Texas. There was little worth noting, except that I got to drive a landing craft and had my first ride in a Navy single-engine SNJ trainer, similar to what I first flew in flight training. One day at the Corpus Navy Exchange, Dave and I found a baby skunk, all wet and abandoned in the bushes. Since it was too young to odorize us, We took it back to the barracks, dried it off, and gave it some water. We decided to try to keep it as a pet, so we took it to a veterinarian in a shoebox to have it deodorized. On the way, however, we noted that our little flower friend had begun to develop that capacity. Since it was Saturday, the vet put our flower in an outside cage. When we called Monday, the vet said that Flower had passed away. We believed, however, that Flower bought himself a ticket to heaven by fully developing his defensive mechanism over that weekend.
Too bad. I've heard that skunks make good pets, and they are cute little critters. So, that brings us to your last cruise?
Yes, Mike, but first I need to back up to early that year to tell about your mother and me. I will keep the account as factual as I can recall, without vindictiveness. I hope that you can accept that I'm relating this only because it's an event in my life and others too consequential to pass over lightly. For you, some of this may be in the category of, I don't believe I'd have told that. We can delete later, but I want to tell it all to you this time. Plus, there were repercussions to others besides you, your mother, and me.
Understood, Captain. I'll do my best to stick to my role as a reporter and separate personal reactions.
Okay, I'll hold you to that. I hadn't seen Emma for months because of her barriers to intimacy. It was just too frustrating for me to spend the night fully clothed with her, with little more than kissing permitted, and the balance of our relationship did not compensate. So, I was very surprised one Saturday afternoon at the house when I was told there was a girl out front who wanted to see me. There she was, long wavy black hair, tight white sweater, and riding jodhpurs breathtakingly gorgeous. After driving a while in her car, I asked where she wanted to go. I was stunned when she said to a motel. There was little doubt what was coming, but I chose to go along, one step at a time. What man can ever understand what goes through a woman's mind when she makes these decisions? In the motel, barriers were lowered, and whatever doubt I had about the extent of her intentions were quickly extinguished. Everything was happening way too fast for me. After all, this was to be my first time. Obviously, I was not her first. I panicked and told her I couldn't go through with it because, as she already knew, I was engaged to Aurelie and I was not in love with her. It was a bad scene, Mike. Emma collapsed in tears, humiliated. You know how women's tears work on us. I felt like a complete jerk. So I apologized profusely and tried my best to console her. In my view then, when a woman sincerely offers her body, it is a kind of sacred act which no man should reject cruelly. That's how naive I was. My consoling worked too well, however. Things heated up to the point where the main event was imminent. There was just one stipulation by Emma. I had to promise not to pull out. It had something to do with her being Catholic, but at that point I agreed. Afterward, I was remorseful and fearful of the possible consequences. A few weeks later, I flew to Denver to take the Navy's aviation flight aptitude test and physical exam. I had two concerns. First, my high blood pressure history. Because the Army said it was just a nervous reaction to having it taken, I had daily readings done at the campus clinic to accustom myself to it. It worked. My pressure dropped to a consistent 110 for years after, but I couldn't be sure how I would react in this all-important examination. Secondly, I wasn't sure of my eyesight. I had worn glasses for several years in Georgia. There was no remaining problem I knew about. Still, there was cause for concern. Pondering the possibilities during the flight to Denver, I had my third imaginary conversation with God. Is flying still the most important goal of your life? He asked. Yes, it is, I replied. Would you sacrifice anything for it? He asked. Anything, I said. Would you give up orally? He asked. That stopped me for a minute before I replied, yes.
Wow, God asked you hard questions, didn't he? First your life, and then O'Reilly. What happened?
Everything went well in Denver. No problem with my eyes or heart, and I had their first ever perfect score on the flight aptitude test. At that time, Navy's test, developed during World War II, was the most accurate job aptitude test ever devised.
Great, so you were on your way to flight training, home free.
Not quite, Mike. When I got home, Emma came bouncing up to me with a broad smile and announced, "Guess what, Manuel? I'm pregnant."
So God was having you make good on your choice, wasn't he?
No doubt, Mike. That would surely end my relationship with Aurelie, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. Emma wanted to get married immediately, supposedly just to legally legitimize the birth. I explained that I could not be married until I was commissioned in September following my final summer Navy cruise, or I would be tossed out of the NROTC program and lose my entire Navy future. Emma wouldn't hear of postponing the wedding. Figuring that I would put it off and skip out on her after the cruise, Emma reported me to the Dean of Men, and I was called into his office. Although the Dean had no authority in such matters, I was lectured on doing the honorable thing. That wasn't so bad, but Emma's next act was a call to my parents to be the first to tell them they were going to be grandparents. The first I knew of the call was when Father showed up to intervene. After meeting Emma, his advice to me was to marry her and move in with her, and then tell Navy about it during the cruise before I was commissioned. He also advised me to tell Aurelie goodbye and never see her again. Otherwise, she would make me suffer for it the rest of my life with her. Next, Emma threatened to report me to the CO of the NROTC with the attorney she worked for in town. She was going for the throat and didn't give a damn about the consequences. The only concession she made was a promise that her attorney would take care of the divorce following the birth, free of charge, no strings attached. Her only purpose, she insisted, was a legitimate name for the child. There was no realistic choice left. I was in a corner with no practical option remaining but to marry her and hope for the best with Navy. Needless to say, however, the only feeling I had for Emma was hatred, especially after her best friend confided to me that Emma told her the pregnancy was intentional. My parents, especially Mother, never believed that I was the father, though I never dwelled on it. Nevertheless, Ernie Suazo was right about Emma being bad news. I should have listened to him. Finally, Emma and I were married in a civil ceremony with a few of her friends attending. I kept my head down and mouth shut in what must have been among the most unhappy shotgun wedding ever. The mood was sustained when a sandstorm canceled graduation exercises and diplomas were mailed out. It was a great relief to graduate and leave Albuquerque for summer cruise aboard the battleship Wisconsin, from Norfolk bound for Scotland and Denmark.
Would you have returned after the cruise for the marriage, Captain?
If Emma hadn't been so hatefully aggressive, yes. I suppose I might even have tried to make a go of it, given the chance. That option was never proposed until it was far too late. Looking back, it's obvious that Emma wasn't interested in marriage. After all, she never spent a day of her life cohabitating in one, did she?
No, but because she was Catholic, she felt she was always married to you.
I know she said that, Mike, but do you really believe it? Even discounting her former annulled marriage, there is the fact that she and I were married outside the church, so it was never blessed, and we never lived a single day as a married couple. Whatever, it doesn't really matter. If that rationale gave her a socially approved crutch to lean on, I was a very happy camper to be leaving Albuquerque with Bob driving his new Pontiac sedan, towing my 1929 Ford Roadster hot rod.
What happened to the 40 Plymouth and Bob's 32 Roadster?
Glad you asked, Mike. There are two more Albuquerque stories to tell involving the Roadsters. When Bob's parents gave him the Pontiac, he sold his 32 Roadster, and we sold the Plymouth. I then owned the 40 Ford Coupe for a short time, but sold it to buy the 29 Roadster. It was a beautiful classic hot rod, which won first place at the State Fair Auto Show that year. The father of the kid that owned it was a car dealer, and the kid also had a classic canary yellow 51 Mercury Coupe. When the kid was arrested on his second marijuana charge, the police told the father to get the kid out of the state or he was going to jail. So his father sent him to UC Berkeley. Since he could take only one car and preferred the Mirror, I sold the 40 Ford and bought the Roadster for $500. Bob was into drag racing, so I tagged along by racing the 40 Coupe and then the 29 Roadster, but I didn't see much fun in that, so I just had fun driving around town and the open roads. I never came closer to death than one afternoon taking a mountain curve too fast and came within inches of skidding off to a 2,000-foot embankment. Hey, that reminds me of another one I'll back up and throw in here. On a visit to Colorado Springs, I took Mother for a ride on a mountain dirt road in my 40 Ford Coupe. When I took a curve too fast and the right rear wheel went off the road on a steep embankment, Mother stuck the heel of her right brake foot shoe right through the floorboard. Another one of our little secrets we never shared with Father. So here's the other 29 Roadster story. While the whole family was in Munich, I sometimes went to the Armed Forces radio studio to watch Father's band record radio shows, where I met the sergeant announcer for Hillbilly Gasthaus, the most popular radio show in all of Europe. The show came on at 3 p.m. after Outpost Concert Classical Music Show with the announcement. Now let's listen to some good music. Well, guess who I ran into on campus one day? That announcer. He was out of the Army attending UNM, so we hopped into the Roadster and went to a Mexican bar for a beer. He happened to have a pint of bourbon with him, so we got good and blitzed. Interestingly, before the Army, he had been a radio soap opera actor in New York. But when he followed me into the men's room and stuck his tongue in my ear while I was standing at the urinal, I knew it was time to go home. I don't remember much about what happened, except fighting him off as we rounded a curve. When I came to, I had busted out my 2 front teeth on the steering wheel after we had gone through a telephone guy wire and hit a large tree. The whole front end was bashed, the gas tank and battery in the rear had pushed the back of the seat forward, and my passenger was unconscious with his forehead into the windshield. Thankfully, he soon regained consciousness, and we parted company, never to meet again. I walked to the fraternity house and woke up Jim so we could tow the Roadster home, but when we got there, it was gone. By then, I was sober enough to call the police to report it stolen. They have it towed. Their comment was that they didn't see how anyone had lived through it.
Fools, drunks, sailors, and children, right, Captain?
You got it, Mike. I was damned lucky. Turns out that the Roadster wasn't so badly damaged. I found a great body shop that straightened the frame, knocked out the dents, and painted it as good as new for only $200. My front teeth were another matter. After a dentist told me what needed to be done and what it would cost, I asked if he could patch me up well enough to last until I was commissioned in 3 months, so the Navy would take care of me. He did some grinding and installed temporary caps for $40, and I was good as new for a while. One more Albuquerque Roadster story. Since it was a classic hot rod, without fenders or bumpers, I bought 2 motorcycle fenders for the front wheels and 2 trailer fenders for the rear wheels. One of my pals, who drove for a mortuary, said I could use their paint booth and equipment if I came in at night while he was on duty. While I was painting, he had a call to bring in a body from the hospital. When he asked if I would like to see the embalming procedure, I reluctantly agreed. The body was a thin old lady in her 80s, laid out on a tilted slab with her blood being drained down the side grooves, while the mortician was beginning the cosmetic enhancements. I was surprised by my unemotional reaction. It's amazing how lifeless a dead body is and how impersonal the procedure is. There really isn't much to it.
I'll take your word for it, Captain. You had some close-ups with life and death in Albuquerque, didn't you?
Yes, and there's another one I almost forgot, perhaps because it falls in the "I don't believe I'd have told that" category. I was sitting in my room one night talking to 3 friends when a brother who was a married photographer at Lovelace Clinic joined us. Since he didn't live in the house, we didn't see him often, but we had seen some photos he had taken at the clinic. The most spectacular one I recall was a series of the side vertical cross-sections of a frozen, stillborn human fetus. On this occasion, however, he asked if he could speak privately to me and one other friend there. He had been asked to recruit 2 volunteers with our general physical features to be sperm donors for an artificial insemination attempt, a pioneering procedure at that time. They would pay us $25 each for each attempt for up to 3 monthly donations. We had no idea what the procedure was, but of course we agreed. $25 was a lot of money to us, and such an interesting way to earn it. Sure beat giving blood. The doctor was a short, round, rosy-cheeked man who surprised me with his shyness. He explained that this was for a couple who were childless because the husband was sterile. Instead of adoption, they preferred this option. The procedure, it was explained, was simply to mix the sperm from 2 donors, for anonymity, on the backside of a diaphragm and insert it into the vagina at the precisely right time. I had to sign legal papers to declare that I would never attempt to learn the identity of the mother if we were successful. Finally, the doctor handed me a urine sample-type plastic cup and directed me to a restroom down the hall where I was to deposit the sperm. That was it. Simple as that. So down the corridor I went with my little specimen cup to what was nothing more than a closet with a toilet and a sink. Pretty sterile atmosphere for this kind of donation, not even any reading material. So picture this, Mike. There I am sitting on a toilet, trying to inspire myself, and an intern opens the door and stands there in shock as several nurses look in. It seemed like an eternity, of course, before the intern backed away, closing the door. Good grief, Charlie Brown. Now what? It wasn't easy, but it worked. The wife got pregnant first try, and that was the end of my professional sperm donor career. I was batting 1,000 in those days.
Is this a good stopping point for this chapter?
Yes, indeed. It's nearly supper time. Let's go.